Well, thank you for your patience. Welcome. My name is Eileen Goodwin, and I am your facilitator this evening. And thank you for being here. Thank you for being on time. As some of you who have been here for the last couple of minutes know, we are having a meeting that is also being offered with Spanish interpretation. And I'm going to turn it over to our Spanish interpreter to explain to those who might need that service how they can access that information. And I'm going to ask Bethany to advance the slides so that folks can see that. Teresa? Teresa, you're on mute.
Buenas noches, yo soy Eileen Goodwin, soy su facilitadora esta noche. Muchas gracias por llegar a tiempo y queremos decirles que esta reunión ofrecemos el servicio de español.
And people, please put yourselves on mute. We're getting some interference. Go ahead, Teresa.
Okay.
And Bethany, if we could advance the slides so people can see, yes, what they need to be interacting with. Okay, so as those of you who can see the screen, which I hope is almost everyone, although I have noticed that we do have some folks that have joined by phone this evening, we will be able to accommodate with a *9 function when it's time for the question and answer. In the meantime, I would ask that our presenters keep in mind, we do have some folks who may or may not be able to see the screen. So if you can on the phone access the PowerPoint tomorrow, it will be up on the website. So you will be able to catch up and look at the slides that are being used. Or please join us on the phone with a different monitor to follow along on in the actual meeting with the slides. As you can see here, there's a way to have people identify as folks who need the interpretation in Spanish, and we have been through that. So we have another room where our interpreter is simultaneously translating our materials to that audience. So next. As I mentioned, again, my name's Eileen Goodwin. I will be running the meeting this evening. I will let you all know that we had almost 175 people register for the meeting, and those people are trickling in. Originally, this meeting was set up to have a function where you would be able to type in your questions, and then I would be able to read those out and have our experts that are joining us this evening answer as many as possible. Because of a quirk of the way this particular meeting was set up, that function is not available this evening to do this via a typed in Q&A box. So we will be using a raised hand function only. That raised hand can be found on the bottom of your screen, and it does look like a hand in a glove. And when you click that, when that's live, which will be later, your name will be put in order, and then we'll just call on you. And we ask that you keep your comments, questions very short, because we are going to be accommodating many, many people. Originally, we were scheduled to have this meeting end at about 8 o'clock. Currently, we have extended that to about 8:30 to accommodate as many people as possible. It is likely and possible that your question won't get the ability to be heard live. So we are going to ask the attendees, whether you're in Spanish or in English, to provide your question if it didn't get a chance to be asked this evening, or a comment at the website that you can see on the bottom of this screen. That's the cityofsanmateo.org/Peninsula, which is the name of the project. So to let you know what we're doing this evening, this is a community meeting. We're very focused on having the PowerPoint, which will take quite a bit of time and is quite technical. So I do encourage you to get comfortable. We'll go through an update of a lot of material, And then some of you have given us questions as you signed in for this meeting. So we do have a spreadsheet of those, and I will be asking our speakers to answer those questions, and that'll start us up, and then we'll turn on the raised hands function and get as many of those accommodated as possible this evening. There are no decisions that will be made anytime soon. This is strictly an update meeting. The formal process is likely to start this spring, and you'll hear more from Matt about precisely what that means, but we will be starting an environmental process, and that would be the time for formal comment and the formal kickoff of the project. So tonight is really 4 questions and answers, getting information out, and pointing you to the resources that we do already have up on the website. As you probably are aware, this meeting was broadly noticed, hence our 175 attendees. We do have knowledge of folks where they signed in from, and it's pretty evenly divided between the people who live in San Mateo or potentially work there and Burlingame. We do have people who have joined us from other communities, but it's really, as our community meetings were, typically when we were live, it's a mixture of folks, and we appreciate everybody who's taken the time out this evening. So let me now go through the agenda. So first, we're going to identify the problem. Why are we here? And why, more importantly, are we here still during COVID and the changes of the traffic? So we'll be talking a little bit about that. As many of you probably are aware, there have been some short-term solutions that have been put in place at Poplar, and Bethany will be going into some discussion of that. And then really what we're here about tonight is to talk about the proposed project. And there are slides about actually what the project would look like, as well as proposed project benefits. So then we'll also talk about some community changes that would come along with those benefits. And that would be things like parking and potentially new traffic patterns. So we'll be giving you an update on that. And then timelines and next steps so that you can have an understanding of what the next steps are and where you will have additional opportunities to give us input. Then, as I mentioned, we will be having a Q&A session, and we encourage all those questions to come in, and whether we get to them tonight or not, we really are interested in hearing from you. So again, we encourage you, if you don't get a chance to ask your question live tonight, to please go ahead and log on to the city website where you see that address below, and it'll be on all of the slides, and give us your questions or comments. And again, no decisions are being made this evening. Today is just to update people and clarify as we can any concerns or questions that you might have. Next. So as I mentioned, originally we were going to have a type-in function. Tonight we will be asking you to raise your hand. That will be the little hand that's on the bottom of your screen. That will become live after the presentation to ask a question. And the reason why we're asking you to wait is because we have a lot of information in the materials, and we're hoping that maybe we've headed off several of the questions this evening. They will be answered in the order that they are received, and then we are also recording this meeting. Hopefully you saw that as you logged in. And so that's a good resource for you to go back and look at the materials, or potentially send a family member or a neighbor who maybe couldn't make it here tonight to go see our recording of this. So that will be up on the website, as well as the PowerPoint, as I mentioned. We will also, if we do have questions that are not answered and come in through the website, we will be refreshing our frequently asked questions document to answer those questions as best we can. Next. Okay, so you've met me. Eileen Goodwin, I'm part of the project team. I do meeting facilitation, and that's my role this evening. I'm joined by Matt Zucca. He is the City of San Mateo's Deputy Public Works Director, and he will give a formal introduction and be one of our key people to answer questions for you this evening. Bethany Lopez is a transportation engineer with the city. She will give the bulk of the slides this evening, and she's been very involved with the design of the project and some of the changes to the community that you'll be hearing about from her. At the end of the presentation, we are also going to have available Joe Hurley. He's with the San Mateo County Transportation Authority. They are one of the funding sources potentially for future elements of the project. And he's here to observe the meeting and answer any questions. And as you'll hear from Matt, his agency is one of the project partners. We also have some technical resources this evening with Ramesh and Ravi. They're consultants to the city and the TA to this project. And Ramesh is the lead engineer on the project, doing the design work. And Ravi is the lead traffic engineer on the project. So they're available to feed technical data to our other people available to answer questions. We may get to something that we ask them to answer. We may or may not, because both Matt and Bethany are very, very familiar with the project details. Okay, and with that, again, for those of you who joined us late, and there were a few, we will be taking questions after the PowerPoint. And so we encourage you to get comfortable. The PowerPoint will go on for probably about 50 minutes. Matt, the forum's yours.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. As Eileen mentioned, my name is Matt Zuka, and I'm the Deputy Director of Public Works. And on behalf of the city, I want to welcome everybody to the meeting tonight for the update on the Peninsula 101 project. We do have a lot of information to share, so please bear with us. We'll get through the presentation here and hopefully be able to have some time to answer any remaining questions. I think for those that are joining late, the meeting is also being translated into Spanish. I'm not speaking in obviously Spanish right now, so the button on the bottom, if you're interested in listening in Spanish, is available for those that wish. So next slide, please. Goals for tonight's meeting, first of all, is to provide a relatively detailed amount of information regarding the project and the update, but particularly the traffic analysis. I think the last time we were out to the public talking about the project, we did receive input about the desire for additional information needs and additional analysis regarding traffic, and that has been what the team has been doing predominantly for the last couple of years, on and off as the efforts continued. So we'll be providing that information. Excuse me. Also, we want to have answer questions that you may have on the project and gather some feedback tonight. But as Eileen mentioned, tonight's not the formal feedback night under as part of the environmental document goes. This is really a community meeting. We will be starting the formal CEQA process, or the environmental review process, in the spring in a couple of months. And that will be where all of the comments are recorded in detail and documented as part of the project. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit.
Hey, Matt, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have been informed by the city staff that the feedback mechanism on the city's website will be live tomorrow. There is not a live feedback question this evening. So if you're looking around right now to figure out where you might submit a question tonight, that link does not exist, but I'm assured by city staff that that will be available tomorrow when the PowerPoint and the video are posted.
Great, thank you. And apologies to everybody for the little hiccup. We were expecting to be able to take any written questions tonight in the Q&A feature in Zoom, and unfortunately that didn't get enabled as part of the meeting. So a little bit of last minute adaptation to try to make sure we are able to get as many questions either verbally tonight or in writing after this, and we'll work on making sure we get as much answers out as we can as well. So then, really, we also want to explain the next steps in the project along with our current estimated schedule, getting back to the goals for the meeting tonight. And but we're not going to be spending too much time on the right-of-way needs for the project. We are working separately with the property owners and businesses in a separate meeting and separate process on that front, and have direct contact with them. So this tonight is really a community meeting to talk about the traffic and the project and provide an update. So I hope you can all take advantage of this time, get your questions in. If not tonight, in writing, we'll work on getting them answered and get as much information as we can. Next slide, please. So the project partners and the roles. There are three primary partners right now, the City of San Mateo being the project sponsor. As a sponsor, San Mateo is responsible for moving the project forward with the various stakeholders and obtaining funding for the project. Ultimately, that responsibility is ours, securing the funding. The 99% of the project lies within the City of San Mateo, with a little bit of work within the city limits of Burlingame. So it does make sense that San Mateo be the project sponsor. The San Mateo County Transportation Authority is the funding partner. They are funding the current phase of work, the preliminary engineering and environmental phase. They might be able to provide funding for subsequent phases of work, depending upon their funding availability and us obtaining project approvals. We'll talk a little bit more about that tonight as well. And then obviously Caltrans. Caltrans is the owner-operator of the actual interchange, but they're also the lead agency under CEQA. CEQA is the California Environmental Quality Act. That is the environmental process and the law that we have to follow in reviewing the environmental impacts of the project, and they will be the lead agency. So our formal CEQA process will be kicking off with Caltrans in the next couple of months. Currently tentatively scheduled for April. Next slide, please. So I'm going to provide a little bit of timeline and background on the project for those of you that might be new. Some of this might be old news, but make sure we're all on the same page. Next slide. So this project goes back quite a ways into 1988, excuse me, when it was first identified in the Measure A expenditure plan. Measure A is a countywide measure for obtaining funding for these types of projects. Since then, the project's been moved forward a number of times, with the most recent being in 2014, when we requested funding to start the Caltrans approval process, which is required to move the project forward. That's been what we've been working on for quite a bit now. We're now in the second phase of that process, the preliminary engineering and environmental clearance phase. The first phase was completed a number of years ago, which resulted actually in a separate process of some short-term improvements along Poplar, but we're now in the engineering and environmental clearance. So that's been the focus for right now. And since this current phase began, the project team has primarily been focused on traffic analysis, and I think that's what you'll largely hear from us and the information you'll get out of the meeting tonight. Next slide, please.
Hey, Matt, I'm getting some feedback. You're hard to hear. And also if you could slow down for our interpreter.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. So at some of the previous public meetings, we did get some feedback also that additional traffic analysis was desired. What you see on the image in front of you is two colors. The blue colors are the intersections and traffic segments, street segments that were initially proposed and are typical for a project of this nature. The scope of the analysis was expanded to include the segments and intersections that are colored in orange. So in all, we went from about roughly 18 locations to 44 locations that have been studied. And the results of that traffic analysis and the findings at those locations will all be presented tonight. Next slide, please. Where are we in the process? So as I mentioned earlier, we had completed the initial project planning, and we're now in the environmental studies and preliminary engineering. This process is intended to, or planned to take through May of 2022, and includes a number of different steps. We're in the box outlined in red. We will be working on the draft environmental CEQA document. That document will have extensive public input and outreach associated with it. We will then work to move towards the final environmental document and obtain a Caltrans approval on the project. The current estimate for the project is around $120 million. That's an old estimate, probably 3 years old, and we know it needs to be updated. But we can't move forward into the subsequent phases of work, which would be design or initiating property acquisition until the city is able to secure the funding. We are essentially fully funded for the current phase of work though, and we'll be continuing through to May of 2022 until we have, hopefully after we've gone through the public input process and obtained the CEQA review, an approved project. I do want to point out that we are, again, undertaking an entirely separate process with the property owners and businesses and tenants. to talk about property acquisition and relocation and inform them and help educate them as to what that process might look like should we get to the point that we have an approved project. And so that the fact that we're not talking about it tonight doesn't mean that we're not engaging in that conversation. We definitely are doing that and making an effort to do so. Next slide, please. So I mentioned the CEQA process, and I wanted to kind of highlight this early on because hopefully this will help answer some questions that people may have about, well, what's involved in that. And this is sort of a list of the actual topics that are studied as part of the CEQA process, as part of the development of the environmental document. And it's quite an extensive list. So all of this information, all of these studies, we've received comments, today in particular regarding items such as aesthetics or other types of impacts. And we've been focusing on traffic as sort of a request of the community, but we do recognize that there is a lot of analysis that does need to be done, and that is planned. So visual aesthetics, cultural aesthetics, noise, vibration, air quality, all of that community impact assessment will all be done in the upcoming months as part of the CEQA process. And next slide. So this, I'm going to turn it over to Bethany Lopez. She's a senior traffic engineer with the city of San Mateo, and she's going to run through more specifics on the technical aspects of the project.
Thanks, Matt. All right, like Matt said, I'm going to be talking through some of the details of the project. So I'll talk briefly about some of the history and why the project was being proposed, and then get into some of the traffic details, as Matt mentioned, that we'd been studying for a good little while, and get you some of those results as well. In addition to that, I'll talk a little bit about what the proposed project would look like and some of those details. So first and foremost, let me just describe the project in and of itself. The Peninsula project is proposing to relocate the southbound ramps, the southbound on and off ramps from their current location at the East Poplar Avenue location to Peninsula Avenue. In doing so, the ramps at Poplar Avenue would need to be closed as they would conflict with the new Peninsula Avenue southbound on-ramp. And the project was proposed as a long-term solution to the safety issues that we were seeing at the Poplar Avenue intersection. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Poplar Avenue ramps and some of the improvements that were made here. So first, I want to talk about how the ramps were designed. The Peninsula project is proposing to address some of the safety concerns here at this intersection because the current Poplar ramps, they were built in the 1950s. They were using an older design standard. That design standard has since changed, meaning that the design that's out there now does not meet the current requirements. This older design lends to vehicles exiting the freeway at higher speeds than what's normally expected on city streets. So the current configuration also causes a lot of queuing and congestion on the city streets around the area. And so I wanted to touch briefly on some of the improvements that the project made. So the project included, I'm going to use my my laser pointer here. The project included a new median that you may be familiar with between Idaho and Amplet. There were also some islands that were added that restricted movements in southbound from the southbound Amplet direction, and were only allowing right turns here, not allowing the movement onto the freeway here any longer. So one of the questions that we get asked often is about this left turn lane that's going from, from the off ramps to South Amplet, and why this was introduced here. So because the freeway ramps are generally owned by Caltrans, these new designs really need to be approved by them. Excuse me. So one of Caltrans's interests is to make sure that any freeway traffic that's coming off of the off ramp does not back up onto the freeway and therefore block any freeway lanes. And it was found that during the analysis of the Poplar Safety Project, that if we were to move that traffic from this intersection to the intersection of Poplar and Humboldt, which is a little bit further west here, that in fact that traffic would back up all the way to the freeway. And so Caltrans required that we maintain this left turn lane here in order to address that issue. So even with these improvements, there's still some concerns about how freeway motorists are interact with the city streets. And so we can see here, this is the movement of vehicles coming off of the freeway. And these movements are the locations where city motorists or motorists on the city streets would interact with those vehicles coming off of the freeway. So these are, again, are some of the concerns that we have about the Poplar Avenue ramps in their current state. So this heat map represents collisions that are in the area that are here after the safety project was completed and before the end of 2019. So these are actually pre-COVID, after Poplar safety project. And so you can see here that there's some dots on the map, and where these dots are sort of transitioning to a pink or brighter color, that means that there's a greater number of collisions at those locations. From this image, we're seeing still that there's a high number of collisions in the area around the Poplar ramps. Comments even from last night's meeting with schools indicated that there's still student-related collisions in this area, even after the Poplar safety project was completed. So in order to address the safety issues at Poplar Avenue, Peninsula Avenue is being proposed as the new location for the southbound ramps. A few of the reasons for that include that over the Peninsula Avenue Bridge, Peninsula Avenue is generally wider in that it has 2 lanes in each direction. It has limited amounts of driveways over the bridge, unlike Poplar Avenue, which is fronted by single and multifamily houses in the immediate vicinity of the ramps. Peninsula Avenue also provides an opportunity to implement bike facilities, which would really expand the east-west connectivity in this area, which isn't currently possible with the Poplar Avenue ramps. And these features also mean that the Peninsula Avenue ramps and the bridge would be able to accommodate future traffic volumes better than Poplar would. So as I mentioned, the Poplar ramps were constructed in the 1950s, and in the graphic below, we can see that the population around that time was much different compared to the current and future population and employment values. This graphic shows a growth in population, the number of households and jobs that we can expect to see in the number in the next 20 years. Which in some cases are an increase of 35% over today's values. And so that's a big increase that we're expecting in this area. And so this is something that I think we're familiar with. This is pre-COVID in the AM peak hours. We know that this area already experiences a fairly significant amount of congestion. But again, in the future, we wanted to talk quickly about some of the traffic analysis that we've completed, and I'll touch on these in a little bit more detail. But when we reviewed the traffic in this area and included that growth in our traffic analysis in both population and employment, and again, that growth is already approved by both the city of Burlingame and cities of San Mateo. We can see that these intersections will be even more impacted than the congestion we're really familiar with before COVID. This graphic represents the average amount of time it takes for a driver to pass through an intersection during the morning peak hours. And while we understand that this is, we're displaying level of service here and delays, we understand that these metrics are no longer used from an environmental analysis standpoint. However, delay and levels of service are still an important thing for us to review from a livability standpoint. And they really represent time for people to drive and live here in these areas. So you'll note in this graphic, this is the AM peak hour in the 2045 time period. And we can see here near some of the school areas where some of the most prevalent delays are in this area. And then here, using that same analysis and those same metrics, the delay and levels of service metrics, we can see in the afternoon peak hours that there's even greater amounts of delay. So again, near the schools, definitely near the ramps and also on the east side of US 101. So another way to look at the delays and level of service impacts are what the backup would be on the city streets. And so in this graphic, we're showing what that backup looks like, and we're actually showing the distance of that backup. And again, this is in 2045 in the morning and afternoon peak hours. And so we can see here that the congestion is fairly substantial, that backup and these delays. So the length of these red lines here really represents the length of those of that backup. And we can see that especially in the areas fronting the elementary and high schools on Poplar Avenue and on the east side of 101. And again, I'll discuss both of these in a little bit more detail in just a few minutes. So as I mentioned, the Peninsula Avenue project was proposed as the long-term solution to the issues that we discussed at Poplar. The safety project, safety improvement project at that location did address some of the issues, but we're still seeing the prevalence of some there still. And again, in the future, we're seeing a lot of those, the volumes and delay issues still fronting the schools. So I'm gonna go over the two alternatives that we're currently reviewing before diving into the traffic analysis. All right, so this image is the spread diamond alternative. This shows the extent of the project on Peninsula Avenue. So we can see here that it extends all the way up to Airport Boulevard and then down just west of Humboldt. And just west of Humboldt is, you can see here that there's 2 lanes in the westbound direction. And this actually transitions back to 1 lane in the westbound direction just after Victoria, which you can't see here on this map. It also shows the extent of the Amplet Boulevard roadway and the realignment that goes from Humboldt all the way down to and toward Poplar. And then also some of the intersection improvements that'll be needed at the Humboldt and Peninsula intersection. So one of the things to note with this is the location of the ramps themselves. And so the spread diamond is really discussing the distance between the off ramps and North Bayshore. So I'll discuss that more in just a moment. So this is the tight diamond alternative. This is very similar in terms of the extents. They're actually nearly identical, but the tight diamond alternative, like I mentioned, really correlates to where that ramp is in relation to its distance to North Bayshore. So again, looking at the location of this ramp and its distance to this intersection. So we can see here in this image, this side-by-side image, exactly what that difference looks like. And so again, we have a little bit more room here between these intersections, and that gets tightened up just a little bit here. And we can see that in both scenarios, Amplet Boulevard stays in the same location. So the tight diamond alternative was proposed as a way for us to review and try to minimize right-of-way impacts. So I just wanted to throw out that you don't have to look very far for an example of a tight diamond interchange. The newly constructed Broadway Avenue interchange just north of here in Burlingame is an example, and it's actually a really similar example in that it has the one side being the tight diamond interchange, and then on the other side it has what we'll call a hook ramp, which is very similar to Peninsula. All right, so from here, I'm going to move into the project traffic analysis. As Matt mentioned earlier, the project team began community outreach for this phase back in 2017. Following that outreach, the team heard a lot of concerns about how traffic would impact the area. And so these next slides are really going to touch on the results of that analysis. All right, so first I want to touch on intersection delay and levels of service that we discussed earlier. Intersection delay is the average amount of time it takes for a driver to pass through an intersection. Our guidelines recommend that intersection delay not exceed 45 seconds, which is about a level of service D. And I'm going to show you where that is here. So it's a little bit difficult to distinguish on this image, and hopefully you'll have a chance to take a look at these in more detail. but this is what an LOS-D intersection would look like. So this amount of delay, a level of service D, really means that we expect there to be some amount of congestion at an intersection, but it isn't standstill traffic. In this graphic, however, we can see that there is a lot of LOSF. LOSF represents delays at signalized intersections over 80 seconds. So it's really anything beyond 80 seconds. And we have a definition for LOSA all the way through LOSF. But because LOSF represents anything just greater than 80 seconds, we wanted to be able to indicate just how much greater than 80 seconds that was. And so we scaled these darker red circles to indicate exactly what that is. And so where the circles are larger, that indicates a higher amount of delay or a worse LOSF, if you will. So as I mentioned before, levels of service and delay are no longer things that a project would look at in an environmental analysis. The traffic analysis that we would analyze now is vehicle miles traveled, and the project team will be looking at vehicle miles traveled associated with this project as we move forward in the environmental analysis. However, we do think that levels of service and intersection delay are still important things to look at when discussing the community experience or how the community will experience the effects of the project. They tend to reflect tangible issues like how easy it might be for someone near these intersections to get out of their driveway, or how long it might take to travel from their home to the freeway or vice versa. This specific graphic represents level of service and delay in the morning peak hours in 2045 if we don't build the project. So continuing with this same analysis, this graphic represents delay and level of service in the area during the morning peak hours in 2045 if we do construct the project. And so you can note that there's a significant decrease in the amount of delay in these areas. Now looking in the afternoon peak hours, the same thing, looking at delay and level of service in 2045, we can see that without the project, there's a significant amount of congestion near the schools. And again, as I mentioned previously, on the east side of US 101, not just the areas near Poplar. And lastly, the afternoon hour in 2045 if the project is constructed. While we still see some delays in the area, it's generally a lot less than if we were not to construct the project. As I touched on before, that time that it takes to get through an intersection really correlates to traffic backup. So if it takes you a long time to get through an intersection, that likely means that there was a large amount of backup at that intersection. So the intention with these next few slides isn't really to touch on the details of every single intersection, but rather to show the trend of congestion in the area or the trend of backup in the area with and without the project. So this and the next slide show congestion or queue changes in the year 2025, which is really the earliest that we think the project could be constructed. In this morning peak hour graphic, we see that much of the queuing issues around the schools on Poplar decreases, and it represents an immediate benefit of the project. This graphic represents that 2025 afternoon peak hour queuing. Again, we see the immediate benefit on Poplar and even on Peninsula where the new ramps would be. These next slides will represent the 2045 timeframe. As I mentioned, these scenarios include already approved growth by both cities that will impact traffic volume, or that will include future traffic volumes. So this particular graphic represents the morning peak hour in that time frame. And note again that the improvement is seen on both sides of the freeway, like North Bayshore, not just in the areas around Poplar. And this graphic represents the peak hours, the afternoon peak hours in 2045. And I did want to mention a quick reminder that these slides will be made available after our presentation if you want to look at any of this in more detail. All right, so what does intersection delay and traffic queuing or this traffic backup really mean for drivers? when traveling through this area. And we think that it correlates directly with travel times. And so in these next slides, we're going to describe a few examples of what travel times are from a few locations in the area. We can't plot every single route, but between these slides, we're hoping that we can provide a sense of how long it'll take to travel through the area with and without the project. So this particular slide demonstrates the time with and without the project in 2045 to travel, to travel from the freeway north of Peninsula to the Delaware Dwight Peninsula intersection. And so you can see on here the origin, which would be the location starting on the freeway and then moving through to the Delaware Dwight Peninsula intersection. So without the project, in the morning, it would take about 11 minutes. And with the project, it would take about 6 minutes to get to the same destination. In the afternoon, without the project, it would take 19 minutes. And with the project, it would take 7 minutes. And so the project in this scenario represents a 5-minute time savings in the morning and 12-minute time savings in the afternoon. So this example looks at the travel time from airport to the freeway south of the current Poplar ramps. Again, in the 2045 time period, we see a time savings of 26 minutes in the morning and 33 minutes in the evening when we compare the without project to the with project scenarios. And so one of the things that's relevant about this is that we really think that, I think we understand that we experience a lot of cut through traffic in this area. And this is one location that I think would significantly benefit, particularly in the afternoon time period when some of this cut through traffic would be directed directly onto the freeway rather than through the neighborhoods. So this scenario represents travel time from California Drive and Peninsula to the freeway south of Poplar. Again, remembering the queuing we saw in this area, it lends to a substantial travel time of about 20 minutes in both the morning and afternoon peak hours, peak times, with and without the project. And in this last scenario, we're showing travel times from the Poplar and Delaware intersection traveling to the freeway just south of the current Poplar ramps. So even though the Poplar route with the project is shorter, fairly substantially, as we saw in those traffic queuing maps, there's a substantial amount of congestion on Poplar Avenue in this area. So that delay and that congestion would be very extensive, whereas if the project were constructed, a lot of that congestion and backup would be alleviated. And so those differences are really what lend to this slight travel time improvement with the project as opposed to without the project, even though the original pathway is a shorter distance, and with the project scenario would be a longer distance. There's still a savings there. So like I mentioned and have been discussing, we really do think that the project will improve safety in this area, particularly near the schools. We also showed that many of the travel times through this area would be reduced with the project, and in general, the traffic operations in the area would improve. And lastly, it's expected that the project will be able to handle improved growth better than the existing ramps. So I'm going to move on to a little bit of what the project itself would look like. All right, so we're going to take a look at a quick cross section of the overpass. So you're going to note where the letters AA are, and I'm going to point them out on here. So, and from here, we're going to look at a cross section looking west. And so we're going to look at this view going this way. So from here, we can see that the overpass is going to be widened slightly from today's configuration to accommodate turn lanes onto the freeway. And so you can see that right turn lane here, and that would be going towards the freeway. And we expect to see separated bike facilities as well on either side of the roadway. And coming back to this image, I also wanted to note a change along Amplet Boulevard south of State Street, where we expect a short segment of that roadway to be narrowed to a one-way road, which would allow, so we anticipate traffic would travel in the northbound direction here. And this would be as a result of the need for the ramps to be constructed in this area. All right, so I also wanted to touch on some of the parking impacts in the area. The new Amplet Boulevard would provide an opportunity to add a significant amount of parking along the realigned roadway. And so you can see that here in the dotted yellow, And that would be from Howard to just north of Poplar. And we think that that would replace parking that might be removed by the ramps up here. So we think that that can be at least an in-kind replacement. There's also some short segments of the North Peninsula frontage road where parking would be impacted. That's primarily as a result of the widening on the bridge. And then a little bit around the intersection of Poplar and Peninsula and Humboldt, where again, we're needing to accommodate that bridge widening. And so the intersection operations are going to change just a little bit there. But again, we do expect to see some of that parking re-implemented just south of that intersection. So this small dotted yellow here. And then I also wanted to touch quickly on the right-of-way needs for the project. As Matt mentioned, we are working directly and we have been communicating directly with the property owners and business owners in this area. And so I'm not going to spend too much time on it right now, but I did want to indicate in this image, there's two scenarios and two potential, I guess, differences in the right-of-way needs for the project. So in this image, we see in the magenta what the layout or the footprint of the project is. And so you can see that really throughout this area. And then these blue parcels represent locations where structures would be impacted. So again, the footprint would potentially impact a structure in these locations. And so these are the tight diamond right-of-way needs. So again, the magenta is where the footprint of the project is. And so we can see that here, and there's a slight amount here. And the blue again is where parcels, parcels where structures are impacted by that footprint. So from here, I'm going to be turning it back over to Matt to wrap it up.
Thanks, Bethany. So talk a little bit about the next steps in the process. Next slide. Okay, so moving the project forward, who's part of the project team? How is this decision going to be made? Basically, the city of San Mateo is, as a project sponsor, will be leading the analysis and evaluating the alternatives, working with Caltrans and selecting the preferred alternative. That'll come out as we go through the environmental phase and the CEQA phase this year. The TA, as a funding source, would approve the project as part of their long-term planning efforts for its fund allocation. So those are the three entities that are involved in basically moving the project forward and selecting the alternatives. Again, the CEQA process that we're about to be starting is going to have extensive input opportunities. The timing of project approval, it would be after the environmental documents have been issued, and this is the when, and the comments from the public have been received. Again, all of those comments, any public comments that are submitted as part of the CEQA and the environmental document process have to be responded to and addressed. So project approval, either from a CEQA standpoint or from Caltrans, wouldn't occur until after that has been completed and the environmental document had been certified. So next slide. With that in mind, I wanted to sort of show this slide again because this sort of highlights again that second column is the process and the phase that we're in right now, with the anticipated completion date of May 2022 being when we would anticipate, based on the current schedule and what we know now, having final project approvals and the CEQA document completed. Again, we cannot move on into the next phase, the project design or right-of-way acquisition, until we have funding to do so. And we currently don't have funding sources for subsequent phases of work. That will obviously take some time and could cause some delay between May and moving on into design itself. Construction obviously could be down the road as well to fully fund the process after we complete the right-of-way acquisition as well. Next slide. And so again, I also wanted to show this slide. This is all of the topics that are going to be studied as part of the environmental document. And just reassure everybody that you're only hearing about traffic tonight, but that has been the focus of the community input that we've received so far. There are a lot of analyses that are going to be done. Tonight is sort of the pre-CEQA opportunity, if nothing else, letting everybody that's on the call tonight know about the CEQA process, that it is getting started, and that there is an opportunity for everybody to provide comment on any and all of these topics. Traffic has just been the one that we've analyzed first and early on, based upon the community input that was received before. So there's going to be plenty of opportunity. No decisions are being made tonight. Lots of chances for additional discussion. Next slide. And the next steps. So as was discussed earlier, we did have property owner business meetings on January 14th, and with a sort of a more of a focus on the right-of-way acquisition process. We did have some stakeholder outreach meetings with the local schools, actually just last night. Tonight is a community meeting, January 27th. The CEQA scoping meeting for spring, again, that will be announced to everybody. That will be the formal kickoff of the process with Caltrans. So all of the work that we're doing now is pre-Caltrans kickoff, and that will be announced. Currently, it's scheduled for April. We haven't set a firm date with Caltrans, so we didn't want to put something in the presentation, but that's the current target, and that will be announced when it does get scheduled and finalized. And again, the public meeting to review in plural the comment on the draft environmental document late this year, early 2022, and if everything goes according to the schedule as laid out by the tasks that we have before us, summer of 2022 would be the environmental document completion and approval of the project by Caltrans. So that is sort of the next steps and the timing that we have. And with that, I will turn it back over to Eileen to introduce the next process.
Thanks, Matt and Bethany. Thank you so much. And as I mentioned earlier, we also have Ramesh and Ravi here from the technical team, as well as Joe Hurley from the funding agency, one of the funding agencies. So a reminder, in just a little bit, we'll make the raise hand function available for you to take advantage of that. It is at the lower part of your screen. It looks like a hand with a glove on it. Those of you who are on the phone, you can press *9 and we'll know that you're the equivalent of a raised hand. We will be answering those orally in the order they're received. If we don't get to your question tonight, as was mentioned earlier, we are going to be posting the video and the PowerPoint, and the city will make an area tomorrow on the website for you to ask your questions or make a comment. This meeting is being recorded, as was mentioned earlier. We are keeping the recording going during the question and answer period, so all of this will be available in the video. I did want to mention, again, as Matt has stressed and as I mentioned earlier, tonight is really hopefully mostly focused on your questions and answers. And that if you have a long comment, we please ask that you put that in through the website so that we can get to as many questions while we have people available to answer them. I am going to start by taking a few of the questions that came in from our sign-up sheet. And some of you who let us know through the sign-ups, whether you had a comment or questions or a little bit of both, all of that has been harvested and will be shared with the project team. And we have actually used some of the comments and questions that came in to be able to try and proactively answer those in the PowerPoint that you just saw. So I am going to abbreviate some of these just to make sure we can get to as many live questions this evening as possible. But let me start with a couple of those questions that were a little specific on a site. And we didn't really get the opportunity to put those into a slide. So I'm going to go ahead and ask our presenters to answer some questions live. So starting with someone who wrote in that they were looking for safer bicycle and cycling access to the area, and especially Coyote Point trails. So will the local streets like Peninsula and North Humboldt get bicycle and ped improvements as part of this project? Bethany?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I mentioned briefly in the cross-section of the view over the bridge that we do expect to be able to accommodate protected bike facilities over the new bridge. One of the other things that we're looking closely at is how the project can align with existing plans, approved plans, approved and adopted plans by both Burlingame and City of San Mateo. City of San Mateo and Burlingame both have newly revised bicycle master plans, and they both call for new facilities, bike facilities on Peninsula Avenue. And San Mateo calls for some new bike facilities on Humboldt. And so, yes, the project is looking at how we can accommodate those adopted plans, the facilities in this area to align with those adopted plans.
And would those go all the way to the Bay Trail? Because that's another question.
Sure. So I think right now the focus would be to allow for those bike facilities to just traverse over and to provide a connection to the existing bike facilities. And so I believe that there is a connection on the east side of the bridge already to the Bay Trail. And so our intention would be to connect with that. And then again, the rest of the city adopted plans would help facilitate the rest of that connection.
As I mentioned, there were comments that came in both supporting the project as well as wondering why the project was still happening because it was not popular. So those have been captured, and as I said, they will be shared with the decision makers and with the project team. Here's another question that I hope we've already made clear, but just to reiterate it, Bethany, the question is, no one from the city has responded to my inquiry as to whether or not this project that's being proposed would result in the elimination of the southbound 101 on-ramp at Poplar.
Yes, the project is intending to close both the on-ramp and the off-ramp at Poplar. There's geometric constraints that need to be addressed with the new ramp. And so with the new ramp construction, there are conflicts with the existing Poplar ramps. And Matt, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the fundamental concern from a safety standpoint is that the on-ramp heading southbound from Peninsula onto 101 will have vehicles going downhill, accelerating to get onto the freeway and merge. And if you look at the plan, that happens right where the Poplar on-ramp would occur. So we actually have not only safety concerns, well, we do have safety concerns about that being even possible. I will also note that Caltrans has asserted that Poplar has to be closed if we're going to be doing the work on Peninsula. So Caltrans also wants to have the Poplar off-ramp and on-ramp closed.
Okay. The next one was asking for some more visuals, specifically in the Peninsula Humboldt area. I think the PowerPoint is very rich with that. There was no question involved with that. Someone wanted to make the point that the Poplar connection is much improved since the recent restrictions. Here's another question that's come in. Do you anticipate using eminent domain to acquire any residential residences? Matt, if you could explain what eminent domain is and then whether or not you plan to use it for residences.
So eminent domain is a very specific process that's through the court system, and the process that we're intending to follow, we would refer to more as property acquisition. That's more of a negotiated process based upon the value and the assessed value of the project. Individual residences, I think we're not anticipating, based on the current project layout, that any single family homes themselves would be touched. There are portions of right-of-way in the San Mateo area where the front part of a parcel might be necessary to widen the sidewalk or move a sidewalk slightly. But for the most part, the property acquisition process is in the map that was shown earlier by Bethany, focused mostly along the curved area of North Amplet, located to the north of Peninsula currently, and potentially there you go, immediately to the south, depending upon which project alternative is selected. Most of those are all, if not all, they all are commercial properties where structures are impacted.
Okay, then there was a question about where are the three options for this project, and hopefully people who have joined us for the PowerPoint understand there's two options plus the no build, and that'll all be posted tomorrow, so you'll have access to this PowerPoint as well as the YouTube video, and be able to make comments on the website tomorrow. Some of these materials were also up already because Bethany did a study session with the City Council of San Mateo back in February, and that is also available on a YouTube on the website. There were some questions and comments. Please fix the potholes on Peninsula. And again, people either supporting or making comments opposed to the project. Question about noise. Will this project cause more noise, and could there be a sound wall potentially put in, or the ones that are there, could they be raised? Matt?
So yeah, as part of the CEQA process, that's one of the things that's going to be analyzed. So the baseline monitoring will be done to figure out what the sounds are, and then there'll be analysis done to figure out whether or not there will be impacts to sound. If mitigation is required, that'll get identified as well as part of the CEQA process. So the answer is to be determined with information to come out to the public as to not only the process, but the findings and whether or not mitigation is warranted.
Okay, next question. This is very specific on a traffic aspect. How many westbound lanes will there be on Peninsula between Humboldt and El Camino Real? And will the intersection of Peninsula, Dwight, Delaware be upgraded so that it is traffic responsive instead of just on a fixed time basis? This sounds like a Bethany question.
Yes, I think I can take that one. So I'm trying to find an image that I can bring up really quickly.
So while Bethany's doing that, I'm sorry, I just want to mention that we will be taking live questions. I just have a few more. The live function is not quite open yet. So if you're pressing on something and nothing's happening, that's why. We will turn it on just a little bit. Go ahead, Bethany.
So it might be a little bit challenging to see on this, but we do expect that just west of the Humboldt and Peninsula interchange, that we would see 2 lanes in the westbound direction, but that second westbound lane would drop at Victoria. And so from west of Victoria, it would be 1 lane in the westbound direction to the rest of the way to El Camino. In response to the question about the Delaware Dwight Peninsula intersection, this is going to be a little bit more detailed than you probably need, but the equipment, the signal equipment at that location is very, very old. And we're working actually as a separate project to try to address that and upgrade that so that it can be traffic responsive. And so because it's old equipment, it doesn't allow that functionality, but that's something that we're actually working on now, not necessarily with the project.
Thanks, Bethany. Another question was related to sound walls and a desire to have some incorporated, and I think Matt answered that generically enough that that was covered as well. So has the project already been approved to move forward, Matt?
No, the project hasn't been approved to move forward. We have to get through the CEQA document and environmental phase and get that formally adopted, incorporate all the public comment, and then it would go basically to the lead agency for adoption, and we would need to get Caltrans formal approval on it. So it has not been formally approved. And even with the formal approval, we obviously have substantial hurdles for implementation with funding as well. So that is the first phase that would allow us to then start looking at funding of subsequent phases.
Okay, next question. Can you provide data that this project will improve safety, compare accident rates at Peninsula and Humboldt today versus Poplar and 101 today? That sounds like a Bethany question.
Yeah, so the data that we showed was after the Poplar Safety Improvements Project. I think it's going to be difficult to say that there's going to be a one-for-one, improvement over the existing conditions, but we did indicate in that image that there are still some collisions in the area of the Poplar ramps. And we do lend a lot of those collisions to the high amount of congestion in that area. There also are a lot of driveways and single family homes and a lot of pedestrians in the area. And so again, we think that by really changing the roadway to Peninsula and allowing for that to be a wider roadway to accommodate the traffic better will facilitate for a safer environment in that area.
Okay, the next 2 questions I'm going to take together. Matt, how many apartment building units are you proposing to tear down to complete this work? And then someone else asked how many homes will be affected. So I believe you touched on this, but just to put an exclamation point on trying to be very clear about the questions that are asked.
Sure, absolutely. So don't know the exact count, but the one apartment complex, depending upon whether or not which alternative is selected, may or may not, the property may or not be required for the project. In terms of single family homes that are going to be touched, structure 0, only a couple on the south side of, I want to say, thank you. On the south side of the project, we'll have small portions that are necessary of the right of way, not the structure, in order to accommodate the new South Amplitt Boulevard. So the right of way itself that's needed is sort of shown on this map. And then this map as well. Thank you, Bethany.
Okay, next question. Is there any plan to also reconfigure the 101 Hillsdale Boulevard interchange to reduce the horrendous daily traffic, rush hour traffic in Foster City before the pandemic?
As part of this project, this project is solely focused on this interchange. Plans that would be happening there at a different interchange would have to happen as part of a separate project. So not as part of this effort, no.
All right, now I'm going to ask Kelly. I still have a couple of questions, but I believe they'll go quickly, to please make our function of raising hands live so we can see how many folks have questions for us this evening. It is a little yellow hand. It should be in the center of the bottom of your screen. Looks like a little glove. And those of you who are on the phone and want to be put in line, please hit *9. Okay, we are getting some hands raised. Let me go back and just finish up those ones that I've been working off of that came through our registration portal. So the next question says, I'm wondering when you plan to purchase the properties due to eminent domain, where the ramp will be built. Well, again, just to be really clear, eminent domain is a specific term that means going to court. I think Matt was very clear that there's a hope that all of the properties could be purchased through a negotiation. And Matt, if you wanted to again point out when that would start.
Yeah, so the soonest that could start would be after project approval, which would be May 2022 based on the current schedule. And again, all of that is funding dependent. So no sooner than then, and depending upon the availability to be able to initiate the next phase.
Okay, and then this question hopefully has been answered, and I answered it a little bit earlier, but again, this person didn't have the benefit of seeing the PowerPoint first. Wanted to know if all the options would be reviewed tonight, and yes, there was. There was a question about whether we had 3 options, the 2 designs plus no build / do nothing. And yes, in fact, we showed with the project, without the project, as well as the spread diamond and the tight diamond. So I believe that that has been answered. Okay, now we're moving to live questions. So far, I see 10 attendees with their hands up. I'll be working with Kelly Benz. Kelly is the Public Works Department of the city's Public Information Officer, and she's doing a great job helping on the backside this evening, keeping the meeting moving. Again, in case some people, because I've been watching our attendees, they come, they go. Tonight is not a decision making. It's not even a formal record. So again, our hope tonight is that you're asking questions. We have resources to answer. Or, as you heard from Matt, there's a lot of topics that will be covered in the next phase of the project, which is the environmental process. We may not have the science or the homework done to be able to answer that, but we'll let you know if that's the case. So, I would ask you to keep your comment or question very short so we can get to as many people as possible this evening. There's well over 100 people in attendance, and I want to make sure we can get to as many before we adjourn this evening in about an hour and 15 minutes or so. So Kaushik Bhaumik, you are our first speaker. Kelly, if we can get Kaushik unmuted.
Hi. Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yeah, Kaushik Bhaumik. I reside in Burlingame. So when this project was looked at back in 2007, one of the issues that came up was that in order to support an interchange, Peninsula Avenue needed to be widened, that it needed to be much wider to support the traffic. Is that still an issue? Is that going to be investigated? Because that's what back in 2007, led to for this project to be shut down, because the widening of Peninsula Avenue and the associated property domain, seizures that would be needed along the north side of Peninsula was too much for the town. So any comment on that?
Matt, Bethany?
The analysis that we've been doing as part of the most recent phase, we showed all of the property acquisition and sort of the extents of the project. So the modeling and the analysis that's done has identified what property is needed. So I wasn't involved obviously in 2007, and the engineering may have changed it somewhat, but I guess the short answer is no, based on the analysis right now. I don't know, Beth, if you have more background on that.
I don't have any more background on that, but just to reiterate what you're saying, we do expect the bridge to widen. That I think is a given. However, further on down Peninsula between perhaps California and Humboldt, there isn't an expectation to widen through there or to have any right-of-way needs there.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you. The next person is Gulan Dai. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hey, hello. So I live in the south part of Poplar Avenue, like with the closure of the Poplar ramps. So I have to drive all the way to the Peninsula to get to the southbound 101. Have you folks done any of the research, like for the potential delays for the neighborhood, like on the south part of Poplar Avenue?
That's a Bethany question for sure. Yeah, we're definitely looking at the intersection delays throughout this area. That area, the Poplar and Amplet intersection, Poplar and Humboldt, those are all study intersections that were included in this analysis. I think we do recognize that there's going to be a handful of people in the area that may have to travel a little bit of a longer time to get to the ramps. And I think that's understood just because we're simply moving the ramps further away from some places. However, with the change in the ramps, with the new ramps, we do expect that that will alleviate a lot of the congestion in the area. And so we think that the travel times are going to be somewhat comparable. We don't think that they're going to be very, very much longer than they are currently.
Okay. Eric Winkler. Eric?
There we go. I just saw the option. Hi. So I live on Victoria Road between Bayswater and Peninsula. And I'm kind of concerned that that Peninsula Avenue is going to turn into another Hillsdale Boulevard nightmare. That overcrossing is horrible just because of all the activity that's going on. And I'm afraid, not so much that whether it's a short diamond or a long diamond, I'm afraid that that East Bayshore connection there with the pedestrian crossings that seem almost redundant to cross over right there is already causing super long delays. Is there any thought to maybe eliminating some pedestrian crossings there, making that more logical, that people coming from the Bayshore area can walk towards Coyote Point, or they can cross at Bayshore there and just go across the Peninsula Avenue on the southern sidewalk rather than crossing over to the northern and having a 32-second delay every time. And now it's an automatic delay because of the COVID. Nobody wants to touch the buttons. I mean, it takes me forever just to get on the freeway now, and that 1947 ramp was just fine. I could get on the freeway real quick. Any thoughts to fixing that problem, especially on the east side there?
Yeah, I can jump in here for just a second. So that is something that we are looking at, and I think we're still kind of running through that analysis to see if that's something that we might be able to eliminate in that movement. We do recognize that, you know, if there's ever a pedestrian coming through there, that does extend some of the delays. I don't think we expect that to be, you know, that we call that recall when the pedestrians come on automatically, the pedestrian signal. You know, that condition isn't going to be there, you know, throughout the future. And so we do expect that that will turn off eventually. But yes, we're aware of the multiple crossings in that area, and we're going to be looking to see how we can improve that.
Yeah, I think just as a follow-up, you know, as an answer to that. So hopefully they will do something, but also if the short diamond is used, I think the biggest problem is not so much. Yeah, I mean, I'm not even looking so much at what the noise problem is, but I think it's just going to create a very, very short distance between that intersection and the short diamond. So I think that would really, really cause a backup, much worse than what we see on Poplar right now.
we're aware of that. And I guess just to comment on that, that's one of the trade-offs with the tight diamond intersection. But we are looking at the traffic analysis and how it differs from the spread diamond. And in our initial findings, we're not finding that it's substantially different. But again, we are still looking at that.
Okay, and the last part was the parking. I see that with the widening to 2 lanes, 2 westbound lanes between Humboldt and Victoria, it looks like they're going to be removing parking along Peninsula, which is already no parking during the week. And then that half a block on Humboldt there between Bayswater and Peninsula. Is there any thought as to replacing that parking somewhere else? Do you think those people will park at that orange dotted line on one of the graphs, or are they going to come to Victoria and fill up the street?
I'm not sure that we have thoughts on where exactly they would be displaced to. I think we've seen that there is some availability of parking on Humboldt in that area. So I think that there is a possibility that they just stay on Humboldt. But I think the parking that we are going to be replacing with the project does exceed the amount that's there existing. And so we would be increasing that supply from what's existing on Amplet to what would be proposed new with the new Amplet alignment.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
All right, Karen Lowe, followed by Tim Smith. Karen?
Hi, speaking for Karen, living on Poplar, like the tight configuration for the freeway, but I have one question. That's can the 101 northbound, they got so much room on the right side on the North Bay Shore area, if they can just be switched over 2 lanes extra to the east, towards the east, it cuts off a little bit of the trees so that you're able to come southbound. As you're coming southbound, you have more room where you don't have to get rid of the houses, that you can start ramping off and cut into South Amplet, merge into South Amplet, making the 2 lanes instead of going both directions, make it go one direction, have one of the lanes right turn into Pennsylvania Avenue, cut part of that over-ramp, and so that you can have 2 lanes coming out of the Pennsylvania Avenue, merging onto there, or having an option of one of the amplets going straight, or making that Pennsylvania Avenue possibility. Is that possible?
I have to say that I think I'm a little bit confused by what you're discussing, and I would be happy to discuss this in more detail with you, maybe in a phone call if you have an interest in that.
Yes.
Yeah, so I can provide you my contact information.
Okay.
All right, Tim Smith, followed by Lynn Feeney.
Hey, this is Tim. I had 2 questions. One is, your safety data shows that the Peninsula and Delaware intersection is already effectively more unsafe than the current ramp at Poplar. So I'm curious why you don't include that intersection in a lot of your designs, because it seems like that intersection is going to get far worse, even with responsive traffic lights. And then the second piece, if you can just talk about that, Bayview Apartments is 76 units. So I'm just curious how you think about potentially taking that building down in the midst of a pretty dramatic housing crisis we have here.
Okay, I'm going to ask Bethany to cover the question about the Peninsula Delaware interchange, intersection. And then I'm going to have Matt talk about the apartment building.
So just at a high level, when we propose intersection improvements with a project, it usually has to be sort of as a mitigation or something that the project has impacted that we need to resolve. And so right now, I don't believe the project is impacting. If you look at those level of service analyses, the level of service actually stays the same between the project and without the project. And so the project isn't actually having any substantial impacts there, and so therefore wouldn't be responsible for making those changes at that intersection. However, I think we do know just separately, we are looking at collisions around the city as a separate project, and are noting some of these high collision areas. And so both the responsive traffic signal, and I think there's some other things that we're looking at there, like protected left turn phasing, which provides a left turn movement, a dedicated left turn movement would be things that would assist in that location. And so again, not necessarily the responsibility of the project, but things that are on our radar separately.
Okay, and Matt, if you could cover.
That's sort of surprising, just given that we're going to have 2 new lanes of traffic dropping people off in there.
I'm sorry, Tim.
Yeah, it just doesn't really make much sense because you're going to drop 2 new ramps on Peninsula. I don't know how that intersection wouldn't have more traffic on it. It's not like it's all going to disperse on Humboldt.
Yeah, and we can talk about that in more detail if you had an interest in getting some more of those details. So again, I think I wanted to extend that if you have an interest in that.
Okay.
Okay, Matt, if you would cover again the status of that apartment building.
Sure. I mean, I think we certainly are aware and sensitive to the fact that one of the project alternatives would impact that apartment complex, which is one of the reasons that we're studying how the tight diamond option and looking at the traffic trade-offs. As a previous speaker mentioned, we may have implications associated with reduced handling of or the concerns about how pedestrians cross. It may affect traffic operations. So it's a careful balancing act, I think, between the implications of removing housing versus spending well over $100 million on something where you don't get the actual benefit for it at all, or you get a reduced benefit associated with the project. That information is going to get vetted as we select the project alternative and the preferred one, and will definitely be part of the discussion that we have with our council, because I think everybody is aware that that housing would be impacted and that it is scarce.
Okay, Lynn Feeney, followed by William Bratton. Lynn?
Sorry, I thought I had unmuted, but I hadn't. I'm following along actually on Tim. Tim Smith and I live on the same section of Dwight Road between Peninsula and Bayswater. And so what we already noticed, I'm actually very close to Peninsula, what we already notice are quite a few accidents, including pedestrians. I personally have seen 2 in the last 10 years. So I think that to think that it's not going to be impacted by the increased volume, which it's obvious it's going to be increased volume, would be short-sighted. And so, what I would request is that Bethany, probably what you need to do is to have some sort of a conversation, a meeting, probably through Zoom, obviously, with Burlingame residents that are in the Lion Hogue area, because, honestly, it doesn't feel as if we have been really considered because San Mateo owns it. And so, that would be my request. I do have to wonder, I was adding up the number of eminent domain, and it's 25 structures before you count the apartment building. So I do have to wonder about the cost benefit. I'm a business manager, so I kind of go to that right away. So I do have to wonder about that, and I'd like to be able to get visibility to those numbers. So, is that possible to get that information? And Bethany, is it possible for you to have a meeting with the Burlingame Lion Hogue community?
So I can talk about the public outreach right now. The next phase is going to be the CEQA public scoping meeting. And I think we're happy to have, there's going to be an ongoing sort of conversation from the city of San Mateo's perspective, having sort of focused meetings with individual communities that we would want to have a more open community discussion with the community at large. That's the purpose of tonight's meeting, and would invite other people to attend. So this will be, going forward, there will be a community process and engagement process. So I think we're going to continue that. And we may go before the Burlingame City Council at some point, if that's a desire on their part to hear more information on the project. But we sort of need to respect the fact that we are one city and Burlingame is another city as well. If we're having public meetings, we let Burlingame know, and they can notify the communities as well. If you want to talk about, Bethany, about the other aspects of the question.
Before we do that, Matt, just a little bit of more data. The Lion Hogue neighborhood was specifically invited tonight by the city of Burlingame. very specifically included, and about half of the attendees, as I mentioned when we first logged on, I believe, are coming from the city of Burlingame, so you are very well represented, along with San Mateo. And then there's a smattering of people who registered out of either city, San Francisco, as far away as Reading, who's probably a landlord for somebody. So we do have a very big turnout this evening of people from Burlingame. And also, I do meeting facilitation for a living, and I can tell you that there was a Lion Hogue Burlingame specific meeting on the Peninsula project for Burlingame residents only in May of 2017, because I facilitated that meeting and documented that meeting, and it is on the project history for this project. So as a result of that meeting, there were a lot more traffic intersections that were studied by the Peninsula project. So definitely the feedback from the neighbors in Burlingame was incorporated into that traffic information that you had an opportunity to look at earlier, and that's great. If we could put that up, all those orange things, there were quite a few more of those added at that meeting in May of 2017, as you can imagine, from you and your neighbors. And maybe you didn't get a chance to attend that meeting, and maybe you didn't even live there then, but there definitely was a well-attended meeting back then. Sorry, Bethany, go ahead.
I think you guys covered it. I think there was a question about the cost benefit analysis though. And I think maybe I can just touch on some of that some of that would be included in the environmental analysis. And so we'll have to get to that next step to be able to get that data.
And where will they be able to find that information?
Again, during the environmental analysis, we're going to be having that scoping meeting this spring. And so we'll be introducing the project then, and those comments and the analysis itself will be made available for public review and comment.
Okay, William Bratton, followed by Cynthia Newton.
Do you hear me now?
Yes, we do. Thank you.
Thank you. My question is, seeing the proposal tonight, is the interchange, I guess you're calling it the, whatever, the interchange that takes out most of the property, is that the only one that's being considered at this time?
Matt has two different options, so I'm not quite sure which one you were referring to.
The one that takes out the apartment building and all the businesses along Anflet.
No, so
that's the one you're moving forward with?
Both options are still on the table for review. So we presented both of those tonight. Both of them do involve the properties identified on the north side of Peninsula. Only one of the two options involves the property on the south side.
Okay. Are you still open to other suggestions?
We've done a pretty exhaustive analysis so far during the 2 phases of work that we've undertaken with the consultants that have been hired. So I think there have been other options that have been looked at. I can't say that everything's off the table, but there's been a pretty thorough screening process over the course of the years that this project has been evaluated. So I would be surprised if something came up that was cost effective and could be built with the constraints that we have. But I mean, never say never. So
I did just want to add on to that in our project initiation document, project study report that's on our project website, various alternatives were reviewed in there. And these two were chosen as the ones to move forward. And so if there's an interest in reviewing that information is available there.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cynthia, followed by a telephone number ending in 969. It is a 650 area code, and the last 3 digits are 969. You would follow Cynthia. Cynthia.
Hi, I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
I think so. Anyway, I'm Cynthia Newton, the president of the North Shoreview Neighborhood Association, and I just wanted to say that I'm excited about the project. Do you anticipate that it will address all the cut-through traffic that the North Shoreview neighborhood experienced pre-COVID? And I also just wanted to say that this project does seem like a no-brainer to me, given the added traffic we can expect as a result of the recent and planned construction of commercial buildings on the east side of Burlingame. But I was just wondering how much we can expect this to address our cut-through traffic.
Matt, Bethany?
Well, I think that we certainly would hope that with some of the travel time savings that we showed on the one of the slides, where I think from Airport Boulevard onto the freeway was around the 34-minute PM travel time savings, if I recall correctly, that there would be more incentive to get onto the freeway quickly. Again, that does include the efficiencies that were gained. There you go. That would be gained from the Express Lanes project. So I think the analysis that we've done so far would be that with that travel time savings, if someone is heading south, they would no longer need to get on the Poplar and go through the city streets to get.
Yeah, we were more concerned about going down Bayshore, but I think, yeah, from looking at that diagram, that makes sense.
Yeah, so I think Matt might have cut out there for a second, but just to finish his thought. Oh, there he is again. Matt, you cut out for just a second. Yeah.
Do you want to finish? I don't know where I cut out.
I'm not sure either. I was just going to say, as you can see in the graphic, I think the time savings, and one of the reasons why people do cut through is that time savings. And so they're less incentivized to use Humboldt and Poplar, those southbound ramps. And so with the ramps being at this location, we think that they would be more incentivized to use these ramps rather than cutting through the North Shoreview neighborhood.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have our phone number, 650 plus 969 at the end. You need to unmute yourself. You've been given that ability. Kelly, do we have any advice for our phone person on how to unmute?
Yeah, his microphone is open. He'll have to unmute it on his phone. We can go to the next caller if you want to, while we can come back to him.
Okay, let's do that. Ben Toy, you have the floor.
Hi, I agree with most of the data. Big question is another option that has been brought up, but I bring it back up again, is to put the on and off ramp on the freeway side of the sound wall. I actually think that would reduce the overall cost. There would not be any eminent domain. And as Lynn mentioned, she counted 25 properties. Average figure $1 million each. That's $25 million that would be saved just by moving the on and off ramp on the freeway side of the sound wall. And the other issue that would be saved is that Amplet can be left alone. It'll be straight through. They don't have to make the jog. You don't have to widen the two alleyways on the north and south side of Peninsula. And the semis would not have to navigate through tight 90-degree turns through a widened alley. The other issue or question is, since the old drive-in is scheduled to open soon, the last plans I saw was either 3,500 or 3,000 offices, and just take half. We'll go north. The other half will want to go south on 101. They will impact the traffic delays on Peninsula to get to the on-ramp to 101. Did your studies for your LOS grading from A through F include the impact of possibly 1,500 new vehicles?
Okay, those are a couple of different questions. One, let's take the second one first, about whether or not the traffic information accounted for the development that was just mentioned at the drive-in and potentially any other development that's going in at this time. Matt or Bethany, go ahead. Bethany has the floor.
I can jump in on that first part, or I guess on the second question there. That yes, the project did account for growth in the area, especially in this Bayfront area. So yes, our traffic volumes did forecast out what that growth would look like. and included that in our analysis. And so yes, the LOS analysis that we have performed does include growth such as that.
Thank you.
And then the second question, which was first, really talks about whether or not anybody has looked at and whether there could be a off-ramp on the freeway side rather than the community side of the sound wall.
And that analysis, I'm not aware of any space and how that would work. Bethany, I don't know if you were familiar with that analysis, part of the PID phase.
I think, Ben, if this is a similar analysis that we had discussed with you previously, I think we had looked at that and talked about the potential reasons why that may be infeasible. If that isn't the analysis that you're talking about, then I don't think we have looked at that. But again, I would need to run back to the PID to see if, again, that was looked at. So I'll throw it out there again that if you wanted to talk in more detail about that, that option, to see if that's something that we ran through before, that we can certainly do so.
Yes, I'd like to discuss that. It wasn't satisfying at that time. It was not from you. It's from the California Transportation and the consultants. I still believe it can be done on the freeway side.
Okay. Bethany is very generously offering her ability to speak with folks. So again, I just want to remind you that tomorrow when the website is interactive, please remind her that that you want to get together. I think 3 of you have asked for some additional feedback and opportunity to talk through some of your ideas, and she's happy to do that. So if you wouldn't mind just pinging her tomorrow so she has your contact information and you all can follow up. So, so thank you. I do want to go back to our phone person who was a 650 phone number with 969 is the last 3 digits. Okay, I'm still seeing you muted. I understand from Kelly, the phone line is open, but your phone itself is not. Can you unmute yourself? Now, if your phone is like my phone, you have to go to where you have that hide function where you can mute and unmute and do some other things on that window.
It might be that the app, if it's...
It may be that your phone does not accommodate that because I'm not seeing any change and we cannot hear you.
We can go ahead to the next caller and leave his, we can leave his line open, and if he can sort it out, he or she, and just let us know when they have the ability to talk to us, but we do need them to unmute.
Thank you, Kelly. Okay, Travis Darrow, followed by Leslie Lamar. Travis.
Yes, thank you for the time and the walkthrough presentation, great details. I had a question around, and by the way, I do live in the Lion Oak area, so potentially affected by this. I had a question around the results from the Broadway project. You compare that one a little bit. I'm curious the before and after, right? Also the increase in traffic there. And a related question I have is, have you reviewed these numbers again, given a COVID environment? Some companies moving all to remote. Some companies even moving the area. In my company, for example, we can work from remotely as long as we want. Have you taken that into account in terms of the growth? Thank you.
I'll answer the COVID one. Yeah, I mean, I think in the planning horizon of a project like this, where everything going well, funding being fully available, 2025 is the earliest that we would anticipate opening. The development is not stopping and growth is not stopping. So we don't anticipate that that's going to really affect this kind of a project. Certainly we have seen some short-term, in fact, traffic data in 2020 is just kind of not really useful because it isn't really suitable for long-term projections because of the impact on the commute, as everybody has seen. So I think we have factored it in, and the way we're factoring it is by looking at the actual approved growth, because that is what's on the books. And from our observations and the evidence that we've seen, projects are continuing to get built despite COVID. So we continue to need to plan accordingly. And then I don't know, Bethany, if you have any thoughts on Broadway. I think that we showed it for illustrative purposes as to what one looks like more than anything else.
Yeah, we did show it for illustrative purposes. I am not saying that word right. But we were wanting to compare what that tight diamond interchange might look like in that traffic analysis. Though we did also look at those intersections to see if they might be impacted by any of the traffic that might actually go up to those intersections rather than travel to this Peninsula interchange. And we're not seeing that there's a substantial impact there at those locations. And to clarify that the traffic counts that we took were pre-COVID. And so again, as Matt mentioned, the 2020 counts are not really representative of actual traffic volumes and would not be suitable for using for future projections or even current projections. And so again, just wanted to reiterate that the counts that we had taken were done pre-COVID.
Okay, Leslie? Leslie Lamar, followed by Jürgen Poff.
This is actually Randy. Can you hear me?
Just barely. If you could speak up a bit, that would be useful.
Okay, so we live on Dwight Road, right off Peninsula. And, you know, we were at that meeting in the Burlingame City Council in the, a few years ago, 2017, 2016, whenever you said that was. And what they said then was, because the questions were asked, like, why aren't you considering Poplar and all multiple intersections? And the response was, well, the neighbors got upset around Poplar. And so we focused on Peninsula because San Mateo happens to own the land right around Lion Hogue neighborhood. So we never really got a response to that. And the other thing is, like, when they rebuilt the bridge a number of years back, I know it probably needed a seismic upgrade, but I don't know if it was Caltrans or whatever, but they added all this fancy stuff and 2 more stoplights, and they created a traffic jam there that happens every now and then. It never happened before. And then there was no money for landscaping because it looks horrible out there. That's just a big open field. It's all dry and covered with brush. I mean, there's no, so I'm afraid the budgets for these things are not big enough, and it's going to, it's just going to be an eyesore. And then the other thing is, you know, we've busted our butts on our house for 30 freaking years, and it's our retirement. And this is going to knock, you know, a huge amount of the value off our house. And I just want to know if, aside from this eminent domain, if there's any plan to reimburse all the surrounding neighbors for the value of their property dropping significantly.
Okay, so there's a question about whether or not, and again, I would just say that eminent domain means going to court. I think what you mean is property acquisition. And the question is whether there would be some compensation for people who, while there isn't a need formally for the right-of-way for the process, would there be some sort of community-based fund to compensate surrounding property owners? Matt?
I mean, I think we're constrained. The project has specific guidelines that it has to follow. The city has specific laws that we have to follow with respect to how we actually compensate for the impacts of the project. If it's an environmental impact, there are CEQA and mitigation that is required. If there is a property acquisition that's necessary, there's laws that govern how we and what we're obligated to do in order to compensate the property owner, both for really kind of any amount of right-of-way take. In terms of overall general value, that's not something that I believe that we're allowed to do as part of any of this kind of project process.
Yeah, Matt, when I've dealt with this similar question in other jurisdictions where I do meeting facilitation, the professionals say that would be considered a gift of public funds. Right. And so therefore it's not a typical transaction.
Right.
I have been asked to clarify and have you clarify, Matt, the LOS versus VMT one more time. I believe that the environmental document will be looking at VMT, but can you clarify that, or Bethany?
Bethany can probably do it better justice than I can.
Okay, Bethany, if you could just go through that. Had somebody join a little late, and I've gotten that question.
Sure. The project, I think because the project had begun earlier on, we were looking at LOS as part of the environmental impact. However, this past year, the CEQA requirements have changed to only look at vehicle miles traveled. And so that is something that we will be looking at as we move forward into this environmental process. And so we have this LOS analysis. This is still something that our city, the city of San Mateo, requires to be done with the project. And so we are satisfying that requirement. However, again, the projects will be analyzing vehicle miles traveled as part of the CEQA analysis.
Okay, Jürgen, you're next, followed by Janelle Orenicki. Jürgen, you.
Yes, hi. It's actually his wife, Jennifer.
Hi, Jennifer.
Hi there. I think I've probably followed this for 15 or so years, so I am familiar with this. It hasn't changed that much. But I need to echo the last several comments made about degrading the Burlingame portion of this project. Even though it's not in the project area, it does definitely affect us. And I'd like to, before I ask my question, I did want to clarify, because many times when you do these presentations, you compare Poplar as having so many driveways, and this peninsula would not have the driveway issue. And that's absolutely not true. There are driveways all over, up and down Peninsula. I don't know why you think there aren't, but there are. So it is an issue, and there will be displaced parking, as you will need to make at least 4 lanes out of within the right of way. I understand now you're not going to take away the sidewalks or whatever. I don't think so, but you will need to create more lanes out of what are basically 3 lanes now. But here is my question. You have in the area that you want to acquire all these properties, it's significant. I mean, not only significant as far as what is the, I mean, as Lynn said, what is it really worth all this disruption? Do you get that many benefits, or is it about equal? But the second is, what are you doing with, how is that area down there going to end up? Because that is a lot of Burlingame property, and it doesn't appear to me that there will be funding to do anything with it. There's the landscaping on the other side, as Randy mentioned, is non-existent. It's just weeds. And on this side, I don't know what that could be except for just a crime haven, which really concerns me. You mentioned parking. I really doubt anybody would like to park down there, because I wouldn't even necessarily, as I'm imagining it, consider it a safe area. So please consider that and have some funding in mind for how you would beautify that area, if that's even possible.
Okay, so that's, I think would be helpful if we have one of our maps, Matt. And I do think we did do the property owner and business tenant meeting, and those folks are actually in the San Mateo jurisdiction, not Burlingame. But Matt, did you want to speak to how the process would go post-construction and what would happen to any remnant parcels, et cetera? And whether there's funds to beautify things and make them safe, and help Jennifer understand how that would come together.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, everything that you see north of Humboldt is in San Mateo. And so the right-of-way acquisition would all be occurring within the city of San Mateo. The ultimate property disposition somewhat depends on the source of funds and then how that gets allocated and purchased. But certainly part of that could be on some of these parcels where maybe the owner has an interest in coming back into the remaining parcel. That could be part of the process, and some of these businesses come back or uses come back in a modified fashion. It could be also that that doesn't happen, and that as part of the public process, there's a desire to have the land use converted over to some other use, park or for whatever, or parking lot for that matter. All of that is sort of TBD, but point well taken that as part of our project and the funding that we need to have is to secure hopefully the final use of that. That's would be the project sponsor's responsibility, I think, to make sure that we're able to take that to where that land use needs to go. But first of all, it is in San Mateo. Second of all, the final configuration will largely be dictated by how the individual acquisitions go. Well, first of all, the actual which alternative is selected, but second of all, do the property owners have a desire to come back and continue to use the parcels, and then how does that then allow us to then reuse the remaining parcels? So it's still an ongoing conversation, something that we have thought a lot about. Can't answer at this stage of the project, but a point well taken about the funding and making sure that we have it to secure the ultimate best position. Did I capture everything, or did I miss something, Eileen?
No, I think you definitely captured everything I wrote down as the question. Thanks, Jennifer. Okay, Janelle, followed by David Harris. Janelle Aranicki, followed by David Harris.
Hi, yes, I'm Janelle Aranicki. I live on the 800 block of North Idaho. And I have a couple comments first. In regards to the driveways, I really appreciate what the previous speaker just said, because the driveways, not only are they all along Poplar, they're all along Peninsula. They're in the back alley behind North Idaho Street, where you're planning on putting an access road. There's a lot of driveways that are going to be impacted by this project that aren't being considered. And as a newer homeowner in the area, I guess I would love to see the previous plans that have been considered in regards to where these ramps could be located, because it feels like there are locations that wouldn't impact property owners and residential locations in the way that these plans are currently impacting them. And lastly, you've talked about meetings with homeowners. You've talked about meetings with homeowners that have the properties that'll be affected by eminent domain, properties in Lion Hogue. But I have a property that's going to directly back up to this access road that you're planning, and nobody's reached out to us to have a meeting about how this is going to impact us. And I'd like to know if that's planned to happen.
Okay, so I heard three things with two questions. One is the comment that there are a lot of driveways. And two, you had a question about, again, how to access those previous plans. And you wanted to know if there would be a meeting for people impacted by the new traffic circulation and the use of the alley. So Bethany, I'm gonna throw both of those two questions to you about where to access previous plans, and also about the community feedback on the alley.
Sure. As I mentioned previously, the other alternatives that were looked at for this project were discussed in the project study report. That was really the first phase of this project. We're currently in the second phase of this project. And so those were discussed in that report. And these two alternatives that we're talking about now came out as the recommendations for the two alternatives to study with the project. So I think that's the first question. That report is available on our project website here at the webpage, or the link that's shown below. So that can be found there. Regarding the additional community meetings, I'm actually going to throw that to Matt to see if he can answer that.
Yeah, I mean, I think similar to Lion Hogue request, we're certainly open to having additional community meetings and discussion, but we do want them to be open. This is, I think, the revisit of prior community meetings, and there was sort of a hiatus while a bunch of traffic analysis was done, and that was a multi-year process, both given the delays that we actually experienced due to COVID, and then having to collect a bunch of data and actually complete all of the analysis. So this has been, and I'm sure many people have seen this, have heard about this project for a number of years. And so we are coming back out to the public at the moment. And I wouldn't necessarily characterize it as we haven't reached out to you, because of the impact. This is part of that process, and we are trying to make sure that we do get out and that everybody that is in the area, either locally or also, in other areas that might benefit or be potentially impacted by having to take a new route to get to the freeway, are also informed. So, and like I think I said earlier, there's going to be a lot more information coming out as the alternatives and the impacts are analyzed as part of the CEQA process. So when that comes out, formal public comment and written public comment can be taken, documented. And as part of that CEQA process, we are we have to respond to comments. So all of that will be forthcoming. And so the answer to that is yes.
Thank you.
Okay, David Harris, followed by Rebecca Hazelou. And I just want to point out that, you know, I have about 5-6 people's hands up. If you do plan on asking a question, please get your hand up, because we will be closing out the meeting. It's 8 o'clock now, and I want to get through the questions that we have. But again, let us know how many there are so we can budget our time accordingly. Okay, David, followed by Rebecca.
Hi, I have one comment and 2 questions. I live in Lion Hogue, and I just want to echo what Randy and Jennifer had to say about this project, that it really will impact people monetarily and quality of life, even if there's no compensation for that. And that I just really hope that the CEQA process and the city of San Mateo really takes that into account. If you've read anything about Robert Moses in New York City, we all know that people's lives can be pretty drastically impacted by projects, by big projects like this. One question is, has or will the CEQA study take into account Caltrain electrification, which is going to increase the gate times that those gates are down, and whether that could impact how people decide to get on to either at Peninsula or go elsewhere? You know, the Broadway, that's the second part of my question really. Have you taken into account what a Broadway overpass, if that project goes forward, how that might impact traffic patterns? So really the impact of Caltrain electrification and the impact of a Broadway overpass being completed, what those might do. Thank you.
Okay, so the question is whether Caltrain electrification was in the general plan as you did the traffic analysis. Bethany, what was that assumption? Do we know, or will that be a frequently asked questions answer on the line?
I think that one might be an FAQ question that we can get an answer to on.
And as far as whether Broadway itself, the impacts of that, I do know that that project is not fully funded. So my guess is that is probably not part of the analysis, but we can do our due diligence, David, and add that to a FAQ, have the city do that research and put it out for you to be able to see.
If you're projecting out to 2045, I mean, the city's plan is that be next in line, that is almost
right. So if
ready.
It's in their general plan, approved general plan, then I believe it is in the background of the traffic, and I'm looking at Bethany for confirmation. But if it was not in their general plan, then it wouldn't be. So that's the thing, we need to research it, and maybe somebody who's on the project team can do a little research while we're still on tonight and get us that answer. I know that there's a couple people from the team who may be able to do that research while we're here.
Right, and I will say that as part of the CEQA process, there are some constraints that it can't be speculative in nature. It has to go off of approved plans, and so to the extent if it's not, but it's a desire, and that's where the community wants to go, there are limitations in terms of how that information can be incorporated. I know we ran into the same thing when we were reviewing the high-speed rail EIR, that, for example, was it considering the Caltrain 2040 business plan that talked about a lot of increased traffic and whatnot. And because the business plan hadn't been adopted, high-speed rail also was having to only take into account the adopted plan. So we are constrained by what we can and can't consider as part of the CEQA process to a certain extent as well. But we'll definitely answer those questions and make sure it's in the FAQ.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to ask our team, and I'll come back around before we adjourn tonight to see if somebody can get me that answer, and I will try and get that put back into the world. I do want to try again with our phone person who's been patiently waiting. Sorry, Rebecca, I'm going to cut in front. Give this person one more time. 650 with the last initials 969. Your mic is open, but we can see that you are still muted. So to unmute has to happen with your end of things. We've done everything we can to create a channel for you to be able to speak. Okay, I'm still seeing a muted symbol. So I'm going to move on to Rebecca. if we could get Rebecca unmuted from our end, and then she can unmute herself from her end. There she goes. All right, Rebecca, you have the floor.
Yes, hi. Thank you for doing this. I think I would like to address my question to Bethany and kind of piggyback on what it was that Janelle was just talking about. I also own a piece of property on the 800 block of North Idaho, and parking in the area in the evenings and on the weekends is really bad now. You showed in the tight diamond example that you were going to be widening the alley behind our homes and making that a 2-lane road, and that somehow that was going to increase parking. And I don't think that whoever is designing this has taken into account the fact that in order to widen that alley into a 2-lane road, you would need to take all of the parking structures that go with that apartment building there at Bayview Apartments. So you would actually be reducing parking and not by just a little bit. So that widening, somebody needs to account for the fact that you're taking out parking structures for the apartment building there. And as Janelle said, almost all the houses on that block have rear facing driveways. So I don't see how you could possibly be adding parking in that area with that tight diamond plan.
Sure, I can touch on that for a second. So the intention is for that roadway to be widened to a full standard roadway. So I believe right now that's an alleyway, and in that alley parking wouldn't be allowed. And so again, by widening it to a full roadway, we would allow both two-way traffic and parking in the vicinity of that. So, excuse me, not in the vicinity, but along that street. In addition to that, we are aware that there's driveways, there's rear access to a lot of the properties, and all of those would be taken into account when we go through and do the design. We would be able to, we would be definitely maintaining that access to the rear of those properties along this, this new Amplet Boulevard. So, and yes, we're aware of the impacts to, in the apartment building to the parking there. Again, we do think that we'll be able to provide that parking on street where it does not currently exist.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to Jeff Philibert and then Joanne Bennett, and then we still have some more hands.
Hello, thank you. I have two quick questions. One is, I just want to voice, I'm in the North Shoreview neighborhood of San Mateo, and I want to voice our support for the continued use of level of service in your secret analysis. And we'd actually like for the city to consider looking at impacted intersections in our neighborhood too. As Cynthia Newton mentioned, we have a big cut through traffic problem that might be positively impacted by this project or negatively impacted if it doesn't go through. My question is, for those neighbors who are in favor of this project, how can we show or provide meaningful support?
Yeah, I mean, I think the public process is the public process, whether you're sort of in favor or opposed or have just comments or questions. So right now, you know, if anything, if nothing else, everybody understands that the CEQA process is about to open up. That's perfect, because that really will be where we can take formal comments as part of the project review. And like I said, all of that gets documented. In the meantime, if something gets submitted, you can send it to staff. If you want it to go to council, all of that is obviously acceptable as well. But that'll just be taken and put into the project file. If it wants to be recorded, what I would recommend is that wait until the project scoping and kickoff has happened, and then it can be submitted formally as part of the project. So, but you know, from a staff standpoint, we're looking at this technically. And so we want to make sure that whether people are opposed or in favor, the opportunities to provide comment are basically exactly the same.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, Joanne Bennett, followed by Mark Bartos. Joanne, or yeah, Joanne.
Hello.
Hi, I'm Joanne Bennett, and I also live on the 800 block of North Idaho, a longtime resident of the area. And this has been a cloud hanging over our heads. I mean, I first got involved in 2006, and we fought against, some of us fought against making it a full interchange. But I would like to see some thought into maybe what Ben Toy had mentioned, if there's any possibility that they could do these ramps on the freeway side, so it would not take so many properties. I mean, I can't think of any project in San Mateo in recent memory that has had to eminent domain so many properties. I just can't think of it. And also, I would like if we could have a meeting with Jess, the residents that are going to be most affected with this project, thereby being the ones that live on Idaho, Humboldt, you know, because I mean, this is really gonna affect us big time.
Okay, was there a question? I hear some recommendations.
I have many questions. But I mean, I'll save those for a later date.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
All right, Mark Bartos. Mark is my last speaker, so I'm going to make one more, as they used to say in bars when they were open, it's last call. So I did get somebody who wants another round. So great, Mark, you have the floor.
Yeah, hi, thank you very much. So I live with my family here on East Poplar, and I've lived here for over 20 years. And I really understand Randy and the others up there on Peninsula. And I gotta say that the city of San Mateo doesn't really enforce speed limits, and has refused our neighborhood for many years, things like speed bumps and feedback signs and so forth. And it's extremely dangerous to get out on the street. And I would say to the folks up there and Randy that one should consider the schools that are in the neighborhood, the children, and so you're concerned about the quality of life and your home values. While it's important, I think it's important, if you really want to get to a good solution, that you consider the quality of life of our little neighborhood in North Central. The Robert Moses reference was quite ironic, considering that what he did was to people in certain socioeconomic conditions. And this is a little bit of a different thing. So it's best to find a way to work together, as opposed to, hey, I got mine, so don't hurt me. Unless we want to work together to consider the quality of life of both locations. So I'd like to say to Randy and others, maybe we all need to really look at the CEQA document. And like the last speaker mentioned, if there's other options that haven't been identified, maybe we can work together considering both neighborhoods' needs, and to try to see if we can find a solution that's best for everybody. The best thing for North Central is to get rid of that intersection, but maybe we should all work together and find something that's best for both neighborhoods. Thank you.
Okay.
No question, just a comment.
Thank you. I want to follow up with having Matt just explain when that environmental document will be available for review, because I think we've made it very clear that spring will be the kickoff, but that is not the meeting where we're going to have answers to a lot of these questions. And topics like noise and some of the other things that people have mentioned this evening. So Matt, you kick it off, but your team is going to need some time to do the work. So when would you be out with this science and all the information to share?
Based on the current schedule, it would be late 2021, so late this year to early next year. So we've been...
So this time next year-ish.
Ish, exactly. Thanks, Bethany. So this is the anticipated completion. Again, you know, we're coming back out and re-engaging after the traffic analysis, which was the main comment and sort of request that we address and analyze further. And now we're getting to all the other aspects of what's normally involved in a CEQA document that had been sort of put on the back burner pending completion of the traffic. I do want to say also that it is not typical for a project of this nature to have done this type of traffic analysis in advance of the CEQA evaluation, in advance of the project scoping meeting. Normally this is done later in the process. So we have done and spent a really good amount of effort to try to get as much of the traffic concerns out there and into the public so people can understand both the benefit and the impact, and be able to then enter into the CEQA process informed. So anyway, that is something that I think is unusual about this project, but and the timing of it will be towards the end of this year when we would have, or beginning of next year-ish.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, I understand that we've got some people with technical issues that are trying to get their hands to raise. I do see another hand raised. So again, I'm doing last call, seeing if people, this is your last call to get your hand up. Okay, we have a Lori Watanuki. So if we could get her.
Sorry about that, Eileen. Seema's line is open, and then we'll go to Lori after.
Okay, Seema.
Hi, thank you so much. I live in the central neighborhood. I have kids who go to school in Burlingame, and I was curious, I'm sorry if somebody's already asked this, I've been getting the kids through dinner and bedtime. So if somebody's already asked and you've already answered, I apologize, but I was curious if there are plans to reconnect Amplet after the interchange is removed at Poplar. I think there's some concern that if Amplet is not reconnected, that commercial traffic to North Amplet near the DMV might be diverted to the 3rd Avenue exit and have to go through the neighborhood.
Okay, that's definitely a Bethany question. And we've got a good graphic here to show the answer. So Bethany has the floor.
Yeah, so just the short answer to that question is yes. Amplet will be reconnected. And so this is the realigned, this is the new location of where Amplet would be. There would be a connection under the bridge here to connect northbound and southbound in this area. If you were to want to continue south towards Poplar, you would need to come down on State Street and end up over on Poplar in this area. And then the northbound direction can access Amplet along the existing Amplet area. So again, I had mentioned that this area of Amplet may see a decrease in the lane width to accommodate one-way northbound traffic. And so they would be able to exit back this way.
But at the Poplar intersection, it would go straight through now, correct?
Yes, sorry to not answer that part of it, but yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And Bethany, can you just be clear for some of the audience? I don't want people to make assumptions because you showed spread diamond that that's necessarily what you're building. So if you have the opportunity to show the tight diamond and do that as well.
Yes, absolutely. So I think I mentioned that these two alternatives are very similar. So the realignment of Amplet Boulevard would actually be in the same location. They would still, it would still provide this access below Peninsula Avenue. And this would operate much in the same way that the spread diamond was. And yes, that access would be provided at Poplar to go through at that point.
Thanks, Bethany. Okay, Lori Watanuki, you have the floor, but it looks like you are muted. Now you're open. Thank you.
Am I open now?
You are.
Lori Watanuki. I'm a board member of Central Neighborhood Association, and we adjoin the North Central area. And my concern was what Seema just.
Lori, we're losing you. We can't hear you, Lori. Is there another place in your home that you can go with better cell reception? We can't hear anything. So while we're doing this, I am going to ping our project team to see if anybody was able to do the research about our Caltrain question in the general plan. So do we have an answer on that? I'm asking the project team to give me an indication. on whether or not we have an update or whether that will be strictly a frequently asked question answer. Were you able to look at the general plan for Burlingame and suss out whether the Caltrain electrification and or the Burlingame grade separation at Broadway is actually in the approved part of the document? So it looks like we lost Lori. And I am going once, going twice on the feedback from the project team. Ramesh, Ravi?
That's it,
yeah.
hold up.
Yeah, this is Ramesh. Eileen, just to confirm, I just got an update from our traffic team. The Caltrain electrification project is included in the general plan, and also the grade separation project. It's an approved project that city is moving on. It's part of their general plan. When we did that traffic forecast analysis, we did the inclusion of the city of Burlingame's general plan update that was done recently. And that model has been coordinated with the city of Burlingame traffic folks and integrated into our travel demand model when we calculated the forecasted volume that's been used to analyze all the traffic analysis results that Bethany and Matt presented today. So they were included in our analysis.
So they've been included. So thank you, Ramesh, for doing that follow-up and giving us that feedback. We'll also make sure that we make sure that we flag that in our FAQs, but sounds like we were able to get an answer this evening.
Yep.
So is there anyone else that would like to speak before we adjourn this? We appreciate your attendance, and I'm very impressed at how many of you are still on the line, and we really appreciate your great questions here this evening, and hopefully you've got a lot of those answered. I am not seeing any more hands up. Oh, Lori's back. Is she back? I thought she was back for 1 second.
She's on and off, it seems, and she did submit her questions and concerns in the registration, and we definitely know how to reach Lori. She knows how to reach us, so we can follow up with her at a different time. It sounds like she's having technical difficulties.
Okay, so it's 8:20. I am going to adjourn the meeting. Again, thank you very much. If you have additional questions or whatever, we will be having an open way to speak to the project team through the website. Please check back for the PowerPoint, that link, as well as our video tonight. So thank you, and we'll see you hopefully at the scoping meeting. Have a good evening. Stay safe.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.